Thank you, Christina. That's beautiful. Welcome, everyone. We bid you welcome. We do not ask that you believe or expect that you think a certain way, but only that you try to live a kindly and helpful life with the dignity proper to a human being. Welcome all who believe that religion is wider than any sect and deeper than any set of opinions. Welcome all who find in our friendship strength and encouragement for daily living. Good morning and welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Farmington. My name is Barb Eglinton and I am the program moderator and also a member of the Sunday Services Committee. We work with the minister to put together Sunday morning, so the ushers and the music and the sound people, and we invite guest speakers like the guest speaker that we have today, Sharon Peterson, who I'll tell you a little more about later. So if you have ideas for guest speakers or something that you want to share an opinion about Sunday morning, you can let us know, myself or Jesse Sanchez. I'd like to extend a special welcome to any visitors and invite you to socialize after the service in the parking lot, which we do now with COVID. Religious education classes are held downstairs in the social hall. If you need to be directed there, an usher can direct you. For joys and sorrows, we have a few options. There are some blue cards in the pews if you want to write your joy and sorrow on a card and drop it in the basket when the offertory goes around. My phone number is on the first page of the order of service if you want to text your joy or sorrow, or you may come to the microphone at the time of the service when we're sharing. As we begin our service, we remember that our UU principles begin with our pledge to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We are a welcoming congregation. We welcome into our community people of all races, sexual orientation, gender identity, and belief system. Are there any announcements this morning? Yes, Libby.
Libby Berger. I'm representing the Social Justice Committee. Just a reminder that we would really like it if you bring in your old t-shirts. I've got a couple of cloth bags out on top of the little bin in the foyer. You can stuff them in there or put them in the bin if there aren't any bags left. These are for making quilts for people in need, whether they be refugees or homeless people or whatever. You can see me later for any questions.
You can see our website for any additional announcements or our Friday e-blasts to find out things that are going on during the week outside of Sunday. Now let's together recite our shared mission. Affirm our mission. We seek answers everywhere, include everyone, and live with compassion. Now we'll rise as you are willing and able to sing our first hymn, number 138, These Things Shall Be, and we will do all 4 verses. Now I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Sharon Peterson. She was born in Joliet, Illinois, one of 10 children, and grew up mostly in Brooklyn, Michigan, near Jackson. She lived in Ann Arbor for 14 years, getting her bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Michigan and working with a variety of nonprofit organizations, including housing and cooperative, arts and community organizations, along with organizations serving people with disabilities. She and her spouse, Mindy, had a ceremony of commitment in Ann Arbor in 1985, then moved to Jackson to purchase a home in 1994. Soon after, they attended and then joined the Universalist, Unitarian like us, Universalist first, Church of East Liberty, where they were legally married in 2015, after the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage. Yay. Sadly, Mindy passed away on December 24th in 2021, just 4 days before their 36th anniversary of their commitment. Sharon has 2 feline fur babies, Dusty and Noe. In her spare time, Sharon enjoys bike riding, gardening, cooking, and sewing. Most recently, Sharon has worked with Moose Gen, Interfaith, Get Out the Vote campaign, and more recently has turned her attention to LGBTQ+ advocacy in conjunction with Get Out the Vote. Please welcome Sharon Peterson.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be in this historic church, kind of like mine back home in Jackson County. A little bigger. We're about half the size. This reading is from the Religious Institute and was written for National Coming Out Day in October some years back. We are grateful for the gift of our lives and the gift of other people in our lives. Each of us is created with dignity and worth. We are called to love one another and to do nothing to others that we would find hateful to ourselves. We honor the many ways that people live and love. Our common life is enriched when lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender teens can live and learn without fear in their schools, homes, and communities. True justice flourishes when all people can live with authenticity and integrity. We repent of our silence in the face of cruelty in our schools and communities. Our silence leads to death. We weep at the senseless loss of life. We suffer when LGBTQ+ people are oppressed, excluded, and shamed by religious people who overlook the fundamental call to justice in our scriptures. Love does not exclude. We are all worthy. May we work to build a world where all people, no matter their perceived differences, are celebrated and loved. We celebrate sexual and gender diversity as a blessing that enriches us all. Thank you. Well, I'm glad to be with you here today for your service. I approached your congregation offering to talk today in honor of Pride Month, and I'll touch on these things. My coming out story, a little bit about Michigan UU Social Justice Network and welcoming congregation renewal, LGBTQIAN+, what do all these acronym initials mean? Parents, I'll use a little bit of information on gender and sexual orientation, so you might want to screen this. I think if you play this at home anyway, before your kids, unless you've had that talk with them already. Also, what is welcoming renewal and why is it needed? And finally, how to be an ally to the LGBTQ+ population. So a little more about my story. You heard I grew up in Brooklyn, and that's the home of Michigan International Speedway. Believe it or not, I've never been to a race, but I could hear it. I had a quote-unquote normal childhood, thinking I'd meet Mr. Right someday. Still, I detested homophobic talk, even in high school, way back then. I'm turning 60 this summer, by the way. I just assumed gays were a few people in California. Well, coming out is the gradual process of becoming aware of one's sexual orientation, coming out to oneself, coming out to others as comfortable. I went to college following in my older brother's footsteps to Ann Arbor, and that fall, I found myself falling in love with one of my roommates. I told my sister-in-law, and she said it was probably a phase. I didn't wonder if my roommate was gay, just me. When, surprise, my roommate came out to me, I mumbled under my breath, "I've been attracted to you." And she didn't return that sentiment. I think she heard me, but she didn't return that. But she did, however, introduce me to the others in the lesbian community, and on Reagan's inauguration day, believe it or not, but it's no coincidence, I came out. We held a human rights conference that included an LGBT panel workshop. And after hearing these presentations, I said to myself, I can call myself bisexual. And I spent the next year or so in young adult angst, in love with someone who didn't return those feelings, dating guys alternately with, finally, my first girlfriend. That was not a long relationship, but it was an important one to me. I came out to my Protestant minister in my hometown of Brooklyn, Michigan, and he told me he didn't think that was part of God's plan. I didn't agree with him, but I did struggle with what the Bible says in places. There's a wonderful book that was published back then called Is the Homosexual My Neighbor? And it refuted many of the Bible passages people use, like that minister was using for their justification. Within a few years, I said to myself that I was not going to put any more energy into dating men since I fell into less egalitarian patterns with them, always cooking for them, taking care of their needs, before mine, where I could be freer to be myself when I was with a woman. So perhaps it was serendipity around that time that soon I met the woman who was to become my life partner. Being shy, about 9 months after she met me, Mindy had a friend ask me out for her. And we went with that friend to a movie just to kind of break the ice, and then went to another wacky art film a week later, our first solo date. After a few months, I told her that she was the type of woman I'd like to marry, and she held me to that. So on the first anniversary of that solo date, we had our commitment ceremony. We had a UCC campus minister perform the ceremony in the Friends Meeting House and with a reception in the basement of the old Unitarian Church in Ann Arbor. Now, doesn't that sound like a future Unitarian to you? So Mindy and I moved to Jackson to buy an affordable home in '94. And years earlier, my brother had married into the family that was one of the founding families of the Universalist Unitarian Church of East Liberty. And so I was aware of it. And I had attended the Ann Arbor Church with a friend, and I dated a woman from the Flint UU Church and things like that. So I knew that was the denomination I fit in best. But I did not actually join the church until I came home to Jackson and attended the little Universalist Unitarian Church of East Liberty, which had the hominess of a small church, and I just loved it, like the one I'd grown up in. My spouse joined the UU church soon after I did. When I came out in 1980, it was a relatively safe place to do so, in Ann Arbor, which had a human rights ordinance already, and it banned discrimination against LGBT people. But still, I was turned down for a job that I was well qualified for based on my appearance, how I was dressed, etc. And I was in danger from people with guns twice in Ann Arbor because of being gay. One man came into the gay bar where I was brandishing a gun, and luckily we got out safely. And another time I was a speaker at the Pride Month rally in Ann Arbor, and we were warned by Shaky Jake. I don't know if you ever heard of that character. He was a supposed street person who was always busking with a guitar, very colorful. He advised us there was a man in a car across the street with a gun aimed at us. And so we all took shelter around the edge of the federal building, and the police actually were able to disarm him before he caused any problems. He fled on bail, but he was found later, so he was prosecuted. You might know that gay pride has its roots in 1969 when patrons of the Stonewall Inn bar in Greenwich Village, New York, had enough of the police harassment, bashing when they raided bars and things. And they took to the streets in protest after another police raid. So we have Pride Month in June, not only to have fun and celebrate diversity, but to continue to push for civil rights for all. We've come a long ways, but not long enough, because we still don't have federal protections on par with heterosexual folks. When I moved back to the Jackson area, I was fairly closeted there, afraid of what people who knew me or my family would think, and I didn't want Mindy to stop by my work, since she looked quite butch at the time, still does it to her dying day, with a very short hairstyle. And for instance, I hustled her right out of a movie theater rather than see a coworker there with me and her. So eventually, though, we were more comfortable coming out. And in fact, I had gay friends say, "I didn't think you were ever in." But we felt comfortable enough to be interviewed for an article about gay people in the Jackson paper. We were trying to raise awareness and positive press when Proposal 2 came out on the Michigan ballot, which was defining marriage as between one man and one woman, making gay marriage illegal. And that actually did pass, and then thankfully the Supreme Court decision legalizing gay marriage overturned that, making it possible for us to get married. I even have a little wedding book. Our friends took pictures of us. So like I said, in 2015, we got legally married by Reverend Cindy Landrum. Some of you might know her. And then last year, my spouse passed away, just 4 days short of our 36th anniversary. So I think she would be proud, though, that I'm still working for LGBTQ rights at a time politically when some people want to roll our progress backward with laws and regulations like Don't Say Gay in Florida and don't let our trans kids play sports or even have life-affirming medical treatment like in Texas. I became involved with MooseGen, Michigan UU Social Justice Network, when I got a part-time job with them during the 2020 election season, working on Get Out the Vote activities. Each year, MooseGen's board chooses a handful of social justice issues to work on, and the current issues are Get Out the Vote still, women's, LGBTQ+, and reproductive justice, racism, economic justice, and water and environmental justice. Some of you may have been involved, like Yvonne was, with phone and text banking with me in 2020, and we're gearing up to do that some again this year. The type of work MooseGen does includes legislative advocacy, action alerts to encourage contact with legislators and other actions like marches coming up, educational Zooms, and cross-sector organizing. MooseGen relies on membership contributions from both individuals and congregations, and we appreciate your support. uujustice.org. People are very busy, I know, so we're lucky to have MooseGen do some of the social justice heavy lifting and research for and on behalf of Michigan UU congregations. And I want to acknowledge D Church, who I follow in their footsteps here. I feel privileged to work on both DOTV and welcoming and LGBTQ+ advocacy. That means I get to encourage congregations like yours to do welcoming renewal and to let congregations know about advocacy opportunities for LGBTQ rights. We're moving in the right direction with President Biden's undoing some of the previous administration's executive orders that limited LGBTQ rights. And we still have work to do to enshrine these rights in our state and federal laws. So I'll be letting you know through my strategic contacts here when there's things we can advocate on a state level. The states, for right now, looking at whether the state Supreme Court is looking at whether our Elliott Larson law already should include LGBT people. And so that decision's coming soon. Okay. LGBTQIAN+. What do all those letters stand for? Well, you're probably familiar with the acronym LGBT and even Q maybe, so I'll focus on QIAN+. I usually stands for intersex, persons who are born with unclear genitalia or have gender differences that manifest at puberty perhaps, and therefore may have gonads or even traits of both male and female. Traditionally, that trait has been quote-unquote corrected at birth, but there's a movement to not do surgeries on children who present as intersex, instead waiting until the child is old enough to make their own decision about whether they want surgery. Now, what I consider a frontier that's coming to be more understood is non-binary people, the N. Those who cannot define themselves or refuse to have others define themselves as one gender or another, instead believing that gender is a more fluid concept for themselves. They might use they or their for their pronouns, or even per, like person, making up pronouns that more describe them. And use terms like queer or genderqueer that may be at first off-putting to people who think of queer or the Q word as derogatory. But it's like the term dyke or fag. Straight people shouldn't use those words automatically for someone unless they've been told they prefer them, because they may be thought of as epithets. But the LGBTQ+ community may use them internally, embracing their identity, or someone may tell you, I prefer to be called queer. In fact, the UUA is now using another acronym, TGQNB, which stands for transgender, genderqueer, non-binary, which can encompass anyone who feels like they don't fit in the stereotypical male-female heterosexual titles or roles. And queer can be an all-encompassing term for people who feel they're not straight. Some people use Q also for questioning, not to get too confusing here, but those who at this time in their lives are questioning what gender or what sexual orientation they consider themselves. A is for asexual, not having a sexual attraction or desire for other people. A can also refer, though, to allies who are supportive of the LGBTQIAN+ community, usually heterosexual or cisgender people, those whose gender identity corresponds with their birth sex. That's what cisgender means. Activists have used the plus sign to refer to people who self-identify as a sexuality or gender minority, but might not feel they are defined by those other initials. And I find it interesting, too, that some people use the plus to indicate folks who are HIV positive. It's interesting that because while that isn't a sexual minority, the discrimination felt by those who are HIV positive is very similar and often goes along with being a sexual minority. So what is a welcoming congregation and why is it needed? Well, the welcoming congregation movement started about 25 years ago. The 5 practices of welcome renewal are 5 benchmarks that every congregation should integrate into their congregational life to ensure that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual, genderqueer, non-binary, and all feel welcomed and embraced in our Unitarian Universalist congregations. The guideline is that welcoming congregations should meet the following benchmarks annually in order to remain current as a welcoming congregation. But in reality, I will admit that even large congregations sometimes renew these every other year or so, while they're juggling other activities like Green Sanctuary, Eighth Principle, and all those other things that they have to deal with, basically. However, I think these are pretty easy milestones to achieve. So your congregation's annual welcoming practices would get submitted to the UUA using a checklist you can find on the internet, and renewing congregations then receive a certificate and appear on the UUA website, not only as welcoming, but these congregations have done their welcoming renewals. It's really a pretty simple practice if you build it into your annual worship and activities calendar. Perhaps your worship committee could keep track of the welcoming practices, but just don't put just one LGBT person in charge of it. It should be the whole church working on it. The 5 practices of renewal are, first, become a welcoming congregation. So, since you're there already, check. And then welcoming worship services, such as this one. The second practice of welcoming renewal is incorporating welcoming worship services, at least 2 per year, into your ordinary calendar of worship services. These, like today's, may occur during Pride Month or any other day of observance, and there's a list of several of those on the UUA website. And the website also says that an LGBT marriage ceremony, a trans person's naming ritual, or a special remembrance ceremony may fulfill this objective. Then there are welcoming days of observance, and those might be more like lighting a candle for or mentioning during joys and concerns, etc. And those are celebration of at least 6 of the welcoming days of observance that I mentioned, of which there are 14 to choose from. So it's pretty easy to incorporate those into your year too. Another idea is during a story for all ages, or a prayer, a song, art form, etc., that honors the occasion. These days and seasons are important to LGBTQ+ folks because they bring visibility and affirmation after generations of invisibility and erasure. These days remind all that all of who you are is sacred. All of who you are is welcome. If you do a pride service like today, for instance, that can count toward both this and the welcoming worship 2 services requirement. And people say, in my congregation, sometimes people say, why do we talk about this all the time? And the idea is not to have just one token service a year and then say we're welcoming. You know, it's more to acknowledge that LGBTQ people and the community is vital to this congregation's community. Number 4 is welcoming congregation religious education. It's an annual opportunity for the congregation to experience a welcoming congregation religious education module. And the UUA has a new one of those, or publishes one a year. And for instance, it's a one-time or a multi-meeting class. The one my congregation did this year was transgender inclusion in congregations. And that also touches on other types of inclusion when it's talking about radical welcoming. So it's a really nice class. People like it a lot. It's 6 sessions. So welcoming congregations can register for a webinar, or they may choose to sponsor a local seminar for its local congregation and community. You can host a movie talk back, a book discussion, something like that. You're asked to do a little evaluation form and submit that with your welcoming renewal information to the UUA. And 5th is supporting a welcoming project. Usually this means financial support to a LGBTQ organization like PFLAG, Equality Michigan, Affirmations, GLSEN, which supports GSAs at high schools, or many other worthy organizations. You're probably already familiar with some in this area. There's a wonderful man named Reverend Michael Crumpler at the UUA who supervises the welcoming congregation renewal process, and he holds monthly orientations online, and he's a wonderful resource. The UUA expects churches to renew annually, as I mentioned, because they recognize the need for welcoming to be ongoing. And so there's a Facebook page for welcoming, and it's a wonderful resource to have. Now I'd like to talk briefly about how to be an ally. We should always be welcoming to visitors in our churches, of course. We talk about that a lot, I'm sure. We had a person who visited my coffee hour a few times, looking like she was going to an aliens convention. She had her face covered up with sunglasses, before COVID, by the way, and she looked kind of like an astronaut, if not an alien. I had heard that she had environmental allergies, and that's why she masked so thoroughly. And I was welcoming of her at church, even if others might not have been. They found her a little strange. Sometimes she just showed up for coffee hour. So I have to say, I did a good job there, but I didn't do as well when someone wearing lipstick and feminine attire attended a lesbian dinner out in my community. I challenged her, asking, now this is very unwelcoming, asking her an email later like, what are you? Very uncool, in this gender fluid kind of era for me to think that somebody in feminine attire at a lesbian group was not appropriate. The funny thing is, though, I'll admit, this was the same person who had showed up at my coffee hour. So I was welcoming in one situation and not in another. Ah! I cringe to even mention it. But anyway, there's room for people who are different than us, including those on the autism spectrum and gender non-conforming folks, for instance. What if instead we embrace difference? Another issue that the Canadian Unitarian churches are way ahead of us on is accepting polyamorous families, consenting adults who agree to be in partnership with more than just one another person. I'm not asking you to accept pedophiles or persons who prey on others. Just show a little radical welcome for people who aren't hurting anyone, but may not fit into society's norms and would appreciate your welcome. So how can you be a great ally? Here's some pointers. Don't assume someone is straight or gay, etc. Oftentimes, it's okay for that to be unknown. You can ask yourself, why do I need to know their sexual orientation or their gender identity? If it's really important for you to know for some reason, then you might start a conversation with, what are your pronouns? And that can be for anybody. Many gender-conforming people are using their pronouns to show it's no big deal. I sign my emails Sharon Peterson, parentheses, she, her, hers. Other people might say they, them, theirs, etc. Ask your LGBTQ friends if they're comfortable being out. Don't out them to others because it could still cause trouble with their work, family, home, etc. I cringed at my church when, after people attached rainbow flags to their name tags to show openness, a grandfather who had joined the church after that explained to his grandson that it indicated that people were gay. Grandson asked him, nice effort at acceptance, but that wasn't quite right. And it meant that he was open to talking with gay people instead. And that statement could have caused the person wearing that name tag problems because he was a high school guidance counselor. Don't assume gay people aren't interested in having kids or interested in working with kids, but don't assume that they are. Don't assume that all LGBTQ people want to get married or even have a partner. See if you can be supportive of gay youth. Is there a GSA chapter in the area you can help with? Can you encourage one to form? Can you let nearby universities and colleges know that your church is welcoming and offer spiritual solace to folks there? I used that tennis shoe on the cover to remind me of my teenage neighbor who proudly showed off her new rainbow high tops a few years ago to me, teaching me that the rainbow flag had expanded to include the diversity of black and brown people, that black and brown were on her tennis shoe too, and also even taught me about the pink, white, and blue, light blue of the transgender flag, even though those shoes had not caught up with that trend yet. This young woman spoke out at my partner's recent memorial service too, saying it was important to have an out lesbian couple on her street visibly showing her that her parents could accept her too because they accepted us, and that she could have a loving lesbian marriage someday. That was really touching for her to talk about. You as an ally can help work toward passing state and federal laws to protect the rights of LGBTQ+ people. Mooshin tries to alert people when there are actions they can take on this. So you can join our action alert list if you haven't already. We have a Protecting Democracy Rally for Full Equality on Wednesday, September 21st at noon. If any of you are retirees or have flexible work, even take your kids out of school that day and show up at noon on the state capitol lawn, and we'll let legislators know that with me, we won't stand for book banning at schools and libraries on important subjects like slavery, racism, and LGBTQ issues. Even the reproductive rights ballot issue is an important one for LGBTQ people. There's more than 50% of us who have uteruses too, and there's still time to sign petitions. I have some, I know Yvonne has some. See me after the service. If you'd want to get a few neighbors' signatures, I have extras. And please renew your welcoming congregation status and show that on your Facebook and website pages. Have a welcoming educational event or service during Pride Month, perhaps co-sponsoring it with a local organization. And encourage LGBTQ+ people in your area to explore your congregation and realize that it's a safe place to be themselves. Finally, in conclusion, I just want to say that I've seen our nation's and our state's laws can even lose ground depending on what president, governor, or attorney general is in power at the time. It's important for heterosexual people to speak up for gay rights too, just like it's important for white people to adopt anti-racist stances. So I'm asking you to side with love, proclaim your intention to continue your welcoming congregation work on an ongoing basis, and don't let politicians and conservative religious groups be the voices that drown out the voice of truth, justice, reason, and a kinder, gentler world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. Now it's time for our offering. Our contributions help to support the mission and vision of our beloved community. The projects and people who are served reside among us as brothers and sisters in one family. Now take the offering. If you're visiting us for the first time today, and if you're comfortable doing so, we invite you to stand and tell us how you found out about us. We would like to meet you. Anyone? You're moving back to Arizona? No, I'm moving. Oh, you're moving back to Michigan? Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. A perfect heart is one that has known love who are willing or able to sing our second hymn, 170, is that it? We are a gentle, angry people, and we'll sing all 6 verses. I will use words from Cindy Landrum, prior minister at the East Liberty Universalist Unitarian Church. We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection, our concerns, our care for each other. Our service to each other, to the world, and to our faith continues until we are together again. Be strong, be well, be true, and be loving. Thank you, Christina. Christine is our guest, of course, you know, subbing for Diana. She's out. Your music is always wonderful to listen to. Thank you.